Welcome into the Pretend GM Fantasy Football Show. I am Alfredo Brown. We've got our first ever Starts of the Week episode here in Week 15. Dave Kluge and I are going to go through each position, giving you all some of our favorite starts of the week for Week 15, aka round one of your fantasy playoffs. Dave, I'm really excited. But before we get into all that, we've got a giveaway. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, take a moment right now. We're giving away a full-sized NFL football autographed by Denver Broncos running back Javonte Williams, likely the only Denver Broncos running back remaining next year. But all you have to do, really simple, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, send that screenshot over to me on Twitter at @ThePretendGM, and we'll be announcing the winner on our award show. That's right, you heard that correctly. Our award show, the Pretend GMmies. Once the fantasy playoffs are over, we are going to be doing the Pretend GMmies. It's going to be the second annual show, and we'll announce the winner of the giveaway there. The quarterback start of the week for you, Dave. Chicago Bears quarterback Justin Fields going up against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, and it sounds kind of crazy that I have to talk about this, but I do the Football Guys mailbag show, and I cannot tell you how many questions we got this week saying, should I bench Justin Fields with a really tough matchup? And really what I want to say is just start Justin Fields, but let me give you the reasons to start Justin Fields. There should be no concerns whatsoever. I think we kind of realized by now that the Bears just had training wheels on the offense for the first 5 weeks or so. I mean, If you looked at what Justin Fields did early in the season, he was, by all intents and purposes, pretty terrible. But then in week 6, we saw this offense blossom into something that has just been great for Justin Fields. And from week 6 until this point, Justin Fields is the QB1 in points per game by a very big margin. Like, it's not even close. He has proven to be matchup proof after he had big games against New England and Dallas, which were supposed to be the tough stretch on his schedule. And like I said, I just keep seeing questions. Hey, should I bench Justin Fields? And unless for some reason you have Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and Justin Fields on your team, you are not benching Justin Fields this week. Philadelphia looks like it's a tough matchup against quarterbacks, right? But if you look at what they do against running backs, which I hate to say Justin Fields is a running back, but 57.2% of his fantasy production this year has come on the ground. I think that it makes more sense to look at what they give up to running backs, which is 22.65 points per game, which is pretty friendly, middle of the pack at worst. And he's going to be playing at home in a game where he is going to be playing likely from behind. Vegas really projects Philadelphia to run away with this game, which is going to lead him into a position where he's going to have to extend plays, and he's going to be running a lot and racking up fantasy points. So I think that when you look at the defensive matchup, I think that the most comparable matchup that we have so far this season is Dallas. They give up the third fewest points to quarterbacks. They have a very good pass rush, and they are a turnover machine on defense. And Justin Fields was the QB5 when he played against Dallas, putting up 26 points. All I'm going to say to put a bow on this, Justin Fields got you to the playoffs. Don't get too cute and bench him now.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that's been talked about lately of, the start your studs strategy. When you get this deep into the playoffs, or sorry, not the playoffs, this deep into the season, you're in round one of the playoffs and you're looking at a guy like Justin Fields. And there are certain players, like you mentioned, Dave, that just become matchup proof. Like Justin Fields, I still have him as my quarterback 5 for this week. And all of it just deals with the rushing ability. And it doesn't matter what defense he's going up against, because you got to understand that a lot of those times, the defensive numbers that you're seeing for when they go up against a matchup where that team is not allowing a lot of fantasy points towards quarterbacks, that typically trends towards those pass-heavy quarterbacks. It doesn't take into account a lot of these outlier guys like Justin Fields that can break off for 70 to 100 rushing yards. So I think this is one of those things, like, don't overthink it. Don't get too caught up in the matchups. Justin Fields is still a top 5, let's say at worst, top 8 quarterback this week. He should be started every single week. All right, let's take a look here at my quarterback start of the week, and it's Dak Prescott. You mentioned the Cowboys there a couple times, and the Cowboys are like Hansel from Zoolander. It's so damn hot right now. That's what the Cowboys are doing, man. They've won 6 of their last 7 games. They've been pretty good, despite, I know that last week it was ugly against Houston, but they've actually been pretty good. And Dak, though, it hasn't been as pretty as we want it to be. It's been rough for Dak, but it's been good for everyone else in that team. He's had 5 interceptions over the last 3 weeks. That hasn't been pretty for him, but that's not typically what we see from Dak Prescott. He's not typically a turnover-heavy quarterback, and I don't imagine that continues on for much longer. The Jaguars, who they play this week, they're not a really turnover-heavy base defense. They've got just 3 interceptions over their last 9 games. So I'm not expecting this to be one of those games where Dak is throwing 2 interceptions again. And this is one of those teams, the Jaguars, that, yeah, they've had flashes this year. their defense still isn't very good, particularly that pass defense. And I'm going to expect a more efficient game from Dak Prescott here. And just to take a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, since week 6, Jacksonville is 31st in EPA, or expected points added per pass attempt. They're 29th in fantasy points per game allowed to the quarterback position, averaging 26 points per game. Last week, that would have been a top 4 quarterback in fantasy. So I understand that Dak has been rough as of lately, but the matchup here dictates that Dak should have a pretty good week. And over the last 3 weeks, Jacksonville has been 6th in pass rate. So I think that's going to lead to a little bit of a faster paced game. You could probably see a scenario here where Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott are having to throw it out a little bit. Because the Jaguars have been no slouch either on offense, despite this Dallas defense looking good. I mean, Houston was able to throw on them last week. So this could be one of those games where there's a lot of throwing back and forth. And the Jaguars have allowed quarterbacks to throw for multiple touchdowns in 4 of their last 5 games. So if all this is not enough for you to just say, I got to start Dak Prescott, I've got him, like I mentioned, as my quarterback 7 on the week. I think he's easily a top 12 quarterback. And if you're sitting on the fence, you're not sure whether you need to be starting Dak Prescott, put him in your lineups and you'll be pretty happy with him going up against the Jaguars this week.
Yeah, this game has such juicy shootout potential. I think there's kind of this misconception that Dallas is this brick wall defense, and really they aren't. They're a very opportunistic defense that gets a lot of turnovers, but they also give up a lot of big plays. So I could see this one going back and forth with a really fun shootout between Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott.
All right, let's take a look at the running back starts of the week here. Dave, you went a little different here. Okay, you couldn't quite decide. We just put Chiefs running back going up against the Houston Texans. Talk to me about this backfield.
Yes, sir. I'm giving you guys a 2-for-1 special. And I think by this point in the week, everybody has talked about it. Everybody is saying smash, smash, smash. Isiah Pacheco is going to have a huge week. And I agree. But why are we forgetting about Jerick McKinnon, who is literally the RB3 over the last 2 weeks? So I'm just going to cop out here and I'm going to say to start both running backs. I was looking at Jerick McKinnon's consensus ranking and it is RB38. And I just can't really wrap my mind around why he's getting faded here. They have very different roles, but I think they both feast against Houston this week. Pacheco is obviously the between the tackles hammer, and McKinnon is the passing down, hurry up, red zone back. And I think the common thought is that Pacheco just comes out here and smashes from the first through fourth quarter, and McKinnon is the guy to fade. But I'm starting them both as top 20 options this week. This is Andy Reid we're talking about. He never looks at an opponent as an easy win. He is going to come out with his pedal to the metal to start the game. I don't think that we really see them shift into that run game script until the end of the game when they already have a steady lead. So I think a lot of people here have projected that this game is going to get out of hand. And it's going to set the stage for a big Pacheco week. But I think that McKinnon gets his before they get to that point. And Vegas agrees. They right now have the Chiefs as 2 touchdown favorites with an implied total of 32 points. So there are going to be fireworks coming out of the Chiefs offense this week. We've seen McKinnon with the big play ability. And let's just look at last week. What Houston did against, or I'm sorry, what Houston gave up against this Dallas offense. Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott both finished as top 12 running backs last week and totaled 39.3 fantasy points. Now, obviously, there's a slightly better talent level with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard, but I think they have very similarly explosive offenses, and McKinnon and Pacheco should each get theirs. Now, we can't speculate too much on game script, but like I said, this should fall in the Chiefs' favor. And if it does, I think that there's going to be more than enough to go around for McKinnon and Pacheco each to get theirs. This week, Pacheco is my RB11, so you're starting him with confidence, but I've got McKinnon as my RB17, almost 20 spots ahead of his consensus ranking. I'm
Wow.
starting both with absolute confidence this week.
Wow, you are super high on these Chiefs running backs. That is, Dave, you're intense. You're intense. Pacheco at RB11 that's reasonable. The McKinnon one at RB17. What if you don't mind, what led you to that?
Well, another big thing is that, there are ways that you can look at matchups for pass catching running backs.
Mhm.
And right now, McKinnon has faced up against 3 top 10 running backs per Zare over at Football Guys. And those top 10 matchups were Tennessee, Jacksonville, and Denver. And in those 3 matchups, he had at least 6 receptions in every single game. And wouldn't you know it, Houston is also a top 10 matchup against pass catching running backs. So I love Pacheco, and I think that he probably runs for 100 yards and a touchdown. But before they get to that point, I think McKinnon gets his through the air. And as we talked about earlier, on the waiver wire show, McKinnon right now has completely siphoned away the red zone work. In the first game without Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Isiah Pacheco saw 12 to 2 of the red zone opportunities ahead of Mixon. He was pretty efficient with that. And since then, McKinnon has out-touched Pacheco in the red zone 8 to 2. So we're looking at Pacheco getting the between the 20s work, but all of the high value touches are going McKinnon's way. And I think that he just has a monster game in the first half.
Yeah, that was one of those things I was going to mention, Dave, is McKinnon getting those high value touches. He's been getting so much of that work when they get in the red zone, and really a lot of that like goal to go work ends up with Jerick McKinnon. He's doing a lot of those things that we saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire doing earlier in the year, where everyone got super in on CEH because he just kept having the touchdown variants go his way every single time. And I do think that Jerick McKinnon is a startable running back this week. I've got him. I'm probably gonna have to go back to my rankings and reevaluate this. I've got him a little bit lower. I've got him at running back 33 right now in half PPR. Pacheco, I've got him at the RB 15 at the moment. So these guys, I might have to reevaluate it based on what you said here, because I do like this matchup. Houston's obviously a pretty good matchup for them, and we saw how Dallas was able to go off on him last week. But man, this is one of those things where I do think you said we can't totally rely on game script, but I gotta believe that the game script is going to be in favor of the Chiefs, and this could be one of those things where they could get up early. Like you said, Andy Reid is not that kind of coach that takes his foot off the gas pedal, so they could get up early. And man, considering how late it is in the season, this could be one of those where we actually see some of these starters come out. So there's just all kinds of angles from this game coming at us, and I'm trying to think of all those. As good as these guys might be in the beginning of the game, they might not even last all 4 quarters in this if it gets really out of hand.
And the last thing I'll say, and we know with the Chiefs, they aren't your stereotypical team when they get near the goal line. They're not going to line up in a jumbo formation and try to slam it in. They like to take these passes out of the shotgun where they can keep defenses on their heels and they can do creative things, whether it's a jet sweep or whether it's a shovel pass up the middle to a tight end. But in those plays, McKinnon is getting those snaps because he is such a better pass blocker and a pass catcher that they can use him in such more versatile ways. So there's, a chance that Pacheco just gets all the run in the second half. But I think before they get that massive lead, McKinnon is going to be the preferred back.
All right, let's get to my running back start of the week. And listen, guys, it's not pretty. And I'm going to start this out and preface this with the caveat that to me, he's not a top 24 running back. I'm giving you guys an RB3 flex play. Okay. I've got Cam Akers going up against the Green Bay Packers. He's my running back 29 in half PPR formats. And I've got him ahead of guys like Leonard Fournette, Devin Singletary, Antonio Gibson, AJ Dillon. These are names that I think at the beginning of the year or even midway through the year, we would not imagine starting Cam Akers over them. But here we are. Fantasy playoffs call for some weird things. But the Packers, that's the matchup that really has me taking an extra look at Cam Akers and obviously the usage that he's had. But the Packers are giving up the 6th most fantasy points to the running back position on the season. And then over the last 4 weeks, it's gotten even worse. They're allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. They've allowed 6 touchdowns to running backs over those last 4 games. The Rams offense, dare I say, it looked decent, Dave? Like it actually looked okay with Baker Mayfield, did it not?
Oh, it absolutely did. Baker Mayfield, who knew that he would be the shot of hope that this Rams team needed?
Yeah, I didn't think that it would happen, but it did. And so it makes me think that this team could be in position to score a little bit more. The Rams recently, so they jumped from 24th in the season in rush play percentage to over the last 3 weeks now being in number 12 in rush play percentage. They're starting to find a little bit more balance now that Matthew Stafford's not there. And obviously they had things get skewed a little bit, right? With like John Wolford and Bryce Perkins being the starting quarterbacks. But we've started to see a little bit of a shift where they're trying to keep a balanced offense. There is no Cooper Kupp. There's no Allen Robinson. There's not a lot of playmakers on this team. It's almost gotten down to the point where it's like, okay, we've got Baker Mayfield and Cam Akers and Tutu Atwell and Ben Skoranek. And like, it's just kind of who's left standing, right? And so that's what we've seen here with the Rams. Over the last 2 weeks, Cam Akers has really been the guy at the forefront of everything. He's had 80% of the running back carries for the Rams, including back-to-back games with a rushing touchdown. And I mean, don't look now, but over the last 2 weeks, he was the running back 7 and the running back 23 in half PPR formats. So I think, being able to rank him as the running back 29 in half PPR format, going up against the Packers, who have just been dreadful against running backs, I honestly think that I might actually be too low. But this is one of those weeks where we're not seeing a bye week. So you're going to see players who maybe usually would have been ranked higher get ranked a little bit lower. Okay. So try to keep that into context now as we get into the playoffs. There's no bye weeks anymore. So you're going to start to see names in places that might seem unfamiliar. All right, let's get to our wide receiver starts of the week. And Dave, You've got some onions this week, man. You're going with Chris Moore, Houston Texans wide receiver, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Talk to me about Chris Moore.
I feel like it's a little chalky to say, hey, let's go ahead and start the guy coming off of a huge week, but the stars are kind of aligning for him to have another huge week. So why not? Now, there is a caveat here because if Brandon Cooks is removed from the injury report, he has logged back to back practices. But from what I've seen, he's just kind of been doing some warm ups on the sidelines, hasn't really been a full participant yet. So I'm not thinking that he plays this week. He's also got the contract and just team issues that have kind of been hanging over the situation all season. But it also looks like Nico Collins is going to be out this week as well. And last week, with both of those guys off the field, Chris Moore saw 11 targets, 10 receptions, and 124 yards. So I get that you don't always want to chase this, but we already talked about the projected game script when we were talking about the Kansas City backfield. It's going to push Houston into a position where they are going to have to throw the ball. And Chris Moore, being the de facto wide receiver one, is going to be the biggest beneficiary here. So outside of last week, there's only one other game this year where Chris Moore saw 70% or more of the team snaps. That was against Philadelphia, a very stout defense, and he was the wide receiver 18 that week. So I'm not, sitting here beating the drum saying that Chris Moore is this forgotten guy and he's an elite talent that has just slipped through the cracks through his 5-year career. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. I'm just saying that he is the last guy standing on a team that's going to have to throw the ball a lot, and he should benefit from that. So I'm not saying to start this guy as your wide receiver too. You're not benching Mike Evans for him, even though he's been struggling a little bit. You're not benching Jalen Waddle for him, despite his struggles. But he had guys like Drake London and Darius Slayton, DJ Chark, Curtis Samuel. He fits in as a wide receiver 3 or a flex option for me just because of the huge ceiling that he possesses this week. However, like I said, if Brandon Cooks is removed from the injury report, if he logs a full practice, then you want to change this and knock him down a little bit. But if there's going to be no Brandon Cooks and no Nico Collins, fire Chris Moore up as your wide receiver 3.
Yeah, this could be a really heavy, a pass heavy game script for the Texans because if there's no Dameon Pierce, right, and Rex Burkhead, I believe, is banged up as well, you could be seeing a lot of like Dare Agumbawale and Chris Moore and just those guys getting fed a lot of passing work, especially obviously like if we talked about the Kansas City Chiefs get out to an early lead. I've got Chris Moore not nearly as high as you, but I've got him at wide receiver 43 and half PPR. I might, take a little bit of time to reevaluate that. I can't quite put him ahead of guys like Drake London and Darius Slayton, some of the other names you mentioned, but I think he's right there, Dave. And I think that's more so what you're getting at, and what I was getting at with Cam Akers, right? Is that these guys are startable, but it's not necessarily you have to have. They're not must starts, but these are guys that if you're on the fence about them and they are, kind of in line with another option that you might see as kind of like even, you should give the nod to these players. And a guy like Chris Moore, like you mentioned, with that ceiling, he could be really good for your starting lineup this week.
Yeah, and that's why I gave a few guys that I would start him ahead of. I'm not saying that you need to smash this guy into your lineup however possible, but yeah, if you're in a position where you're dealing with some injuries and you need to find somebody, Chris Moore is a guy that I think could really outperform his consensus ranking this week.
Yeah, my wide receiver here, I'm not quite as brave as you, but here's a guy that he struggled last week, and it's Michael Pittman, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, going up against the Minnesota Vikings. This week, I've been playing with it, but I think I've gotten him up as high as wide receiver 19 on the week. So I've got him in that range, but I have him pretty secure as a wide receiver 2 this week, going up against the Minnesota Vikings. Second most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, looking at 41.6 fantasy points per game in PPR. It's quite a lot, Dave. Just doing some quick math there. Over 41 points per game. There's not really a way to split that up where you don't see Michael Pittman performing well here. I can't imagine Alec Pierce or Paris Campbell coming out here with a 30-point game. So Michael Pittman he's already going to be in a good situation. And we just saw the Lions torch the Vikings secondary. 3 different wide receivers scored a touchdown, including my guy, Jameson Williams, and 4 of the Lions wide receivers. Yes, 4 Lions wide receivers finished in the top 32 last week in half PPR scoring formats. So yeah, I think it's very, very reasonable to say that Michael Pittman should be a wide receiver 2 this week with some high-end wide receiver 1 potential. And you even go back the week before with this Minnesota Vikings team, the Jets killed the Vikings through the air with Garrett Wilson and Corey Davis, right? Since week 10, the Vikings are allowing the opposing team's top wide receiver to average nearly 7.5 receptions a game for 102 yards, averaging. the top wide receiver on those teams. So I think it's very reasonable to see Michael Pittman in that area. If he's able to get himself a touchdown, that'd be fantastic. And you look at what he's been able to do with Matt Ryan throughout his career. Pittman averages 6.5 receptions, so not that far off, for 68 yards on 9 targets per game. So we should see a guy that easily lands in that wide receiver 2 range with some really, really good wide receiver 1 upside.
Yeah, and Michael Pittman has been quietly pretty consistent with Matt Ryan. The only problem is he hasn't been scoring touchdowns this year. He's got 2 touchdowns on the entire year, and you called it out. I mean, this team got torched by the Lions last week. So this is absolutely the stage is set for a huge big bounce back week for Michael Pittman. Love that call out.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things, especially even when you get some of these like big name players that have been good. Michael Pittman, we talked about Justin Fields earlier, where I think fantasy managers get into their own head with, oh, well, he had a bad week last week, or, Justin Fields has a tough opponent this week. And, I understand you can't just always do the start your studs thing, but these are good players, right? Like they're allowed to have one bad week, and variance tells you they're going to come back to having another good week again. And like you mentioned, Michael Pittman has been consistent with Matt Ryan in the lineup. So I really do like him this week going up against the Minnesota Vikings. David, let's get to the tight end starts of the week. And my man, you are reaching deep into your bag for this one. And this is a prospect that I loved. And he's been disappointing, but I'm so curious to hear what you have to say about Trey McBride, the tight end for the Arizona Cardinals, going up against the Denver Broncos. This is one that, like, man, you might be finding a hidden gem for fantasy managers that are desperate for tight end play. There's probably not a lot on their waiver wire. This could be the guy.
Yeah, and let's just, call it like it is. Tight ends have been an absolute crapshoot this year and last year and the year before and the year before and the year before. It's just what tight ends are in fantasy. So right now you might be in that tight end carousel where you don't have a Travis Kelce or a TJ Hawkinson or a Mark Andrews, and you're kind of sweating who to start. And let's say Chig isn't on waivers anymore. And let's say, Dulcich or some of these other guys who have gotten hot in previous weeks are already taken, and you're in that position where you need somebody. I'm okay picking up Trey McBride and plugging him directly into your lineup this week because I think the stage is set for him to have a pretty decent week. Last week, he saw his season and career since he's a rookie high with 6 targets, and every single one of them came from Colt McCoy. So very tiny sample size we're looking at here. Colt McCoy and Trey McBride have only played 1 game together, but Colt McCoy just doesn't have the arm strength or the chemistry to utilize Marquise Brown. I think that he is the guy that takes the most significant hit without Kyler Murray on this offense. They had this unconscious chemistry where they could hit each other on all sorts of parts of the field. And we saw last week Colt McCoy was force feeding DeAndre Hopkins targets into triple coverage. So DeAndre Hopkins, obviously a smash start this week, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper and talk about Trey McBride here because his ADOT of 4.8 yards downfield is extremely shallow and makes him kind of that safety valve role for Colt McCoy. So, like I said, DeAndre Hopkins is the biggest beneficiary here, but I think the Colt McCoy is kind of the sneaky second guy that gets a boost here. Now, the Broncos are pretty middle of the pack against tight ends, and some people are getting scared away because they had strong outings against Kelce and Andrews in back-to-back weeks, but they were double teaming those guys and really putting the defensive focus on them. I think if they're going to put that same focus on DeAndre Hopkins, which can open up some opportunities for McBride here. Now, the Broncos are favorites in this matchup, which is going to push them into a possible game script that can work favorably for Trey McBride. And while the season-long numbers are pretty underwhelming for McBride so far, you can chalk a lot of that up to Zach Ertz being healthy for the first half of the season, which made it pretty much impossible for Trey McBride to get on the field. But over the last 4 weeks, he has seen a minimum of 70% of the snaps, and he's running a ton of routes. He is running 86.2% of his snaps are routes being run, which is a great number for a tight end to have. He was the first tight end drafted in 2022. He's being used exclusively as a pass catcher, and now he has some untapped upside with Colt McCoy taking over as the quarterback.
Yeah, Trey McBride was my tight end 1 in this class, which, I mean, at this point doesn't look like it would be correct, but we always see this, right? Like tight ends, they take a little while to develop. And he, as you mentioned, he was sitting behind Zach Ertz. And the other thing that you talk about is how often when he's in the field, he's running routes. That's what Trey McBride has been good at. He's been a yards after catch guy. It hasn't quite happened for him yet here in the NFL. But you mentioned, Colt McCoy getting the ball out quickly to him and short average depth of target over to Trey McBride. Like, he's one of those guys that we're starting to see as the season goes on. Some of these tight ends start to break out. We saw that with Chigokonkwo and a lot of these guys that have that, I don't want to call it elite athleticism, but pretty good athleticism. They're able to make those plays. And I think that these defenses are going to be so just worried about the wide receivers on the outside. So I get that. I can see where Trey McBride could be a good starter for guys this week. I've got him, I think, just outside of my top 24. But I mean, I think you and I can both agree, like once you get to like tight end, I don't know what, 16, like 16 through 30 are all interchangeable at that point. Like the differences between them are just negligible. So I can see it, Dave, where Trey McBride could be that high upside guy.
And the one other thing I'll say, I'm not sure if you remember the exact play, but it was the deepest pass of the game that went to Trey McBride last week, where he made an extremely difficult contested catch, picked up the first down, and laid the hammer on McCourty, knocked him out of the game. That's how you win the trust of your quarterback, being able to make those tough catches across the middle. So I think that him and Colt McCoy just build off of what we saw last week. And again, this isn't a guy that I'm saying that you plug in over Mark Andrews, but if you're looking for somebody as a tight end streamer, he is my favorite tight end streamer this week.
Well, I've got a guy that's actually in the exact same game, not quite a tight end streamer. I think that if you have him, you were likely going to start him anyways, but I just want to give you that nudge in the right direction. I'm talking about Greg Dulcich, the tight end for the Denver Broncos, going up against the Arizona Cardinals. And this one is it's almost like an easy call to make. The Arizona Cardinals are allowing the most fantasy points to the tight end position on the season. They're allowing an average of 6.5 receptions for 73 yards on a per game basis to tight end. And I mean, we just talked about how bad the tight end position has been. When you know that a certain position is going to be getting that many receptions for that many yards, you're fairly comfortable plugging them into your lineup. This week, it looks like for the Broncos, Brett Rippon's going to be likely starting at quarterback opposite Colt McCoy. Last time that Brett Rippon started, that was week 7 against the New York Jets. Dulcich had 6 receptions for 51 yards on 9 targets with a 20% target share. You don't quite see that all that often for tight ends. And mind you, that was with Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Melvin Gordon all on the active roster at the time. So now you're starting to see what this offense might look like without some of those guys, given the injury to Cortland Sutton. Lack of production in the run game with Latavius Murray. Greg Dulcich should be the number 2 weapon on this offense behind Jerry Jeudy, who just went off last week like crazy. I've got Dulcich projected around 6 receptions for 62 yards. Say receptions and Dulcich 5 times fast. That was tough. I've got him projected for around 6 catches. That's how you do it. You just say catches. Around 6 catches for 62 yards. The one thing that does worry me about this game, Dave, and I think it should worry us both when it comes to these tight ends, is that this is Vegas's lowest point total game this week at just 37. You got 2 backup quarterbacks. This could be a really ugly game, but I think the silver lining in that is that sometimes these ugly games lend towards tight end production because these quarterbacks are not quite airing it out. So I have Greg Dulcich right now as my tight end 10 in half PPR. I think that he is a pretty safe tight end start this week.
Yeah. Well, let me just put it this way to kind of back up your opinion here. As I just went on and on about how much I love Trey McBride this week, I have a lot of Greg Dulcich in my leagues, and I'm not even thinking about dropping him for Trey McBride.
There we go. You've heard it here from Dave Kluge himself. Well, everyone, thank you so much for sticking around throughout the whole show. That's it for us today. Good luck in week 15, round 1 of the playoffs. Hopefully, we'll be seeing you guys again here next week. For myself, for Dave Kluge, adios.